Welcome, everybody. For those of you who haven't found their way in yet, please come to the front. There are quite a few seats still available. And this will be a very exciting session ahead of us. I've got the privilege to moderate here as chair of Hydrogen Europe the session on implementing the Green Deal targets for sustainable demand. So we've got quite some esteemed panelist speakers coming up a bit later. But we do start our session today first with Christian Zinglersen from ACER. Christian is Director, EU Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators. And he's got quite a rich history, also in the civil service from Denmark. But before that, or afterwards actually, he was the head of the Global Clean Energy Ministerial Secretariat, hosted at the International Energy Agency in Paris. So very international and European experience you're bringing to the table. And we are very much looking forward, Christian, to your impulse to setting the scene to make us really understand and frame how the implementation of the green targets get on. So please a warm welcome and applause for Christian.
Thanks a lot. I have been invited to give this scene-setting presentation for what will be an impactful panel standing between all of us and lunch, but I know it'll be a good one. It's a bit of a special day for us at ACER, the EU's Energy Regulatory Agency. I'll pull a plug for this one. Our very first hydrogen market monitoring report came out today. We wanted to align it with Hydrogen Week, and some of the, let's say, the most impactful authors are sitting there in the second row. Chilla and Vasilis and Ricardo is some here as well. So very good. I will draw on some of the insights and the analytics which are in this marketing report. And I'll start with a bit of a, let's say, an overview type picture, which has a bit of sweet and a bit of bitter, as is the, I think, the inevitable way of things in a nascent growth type environment. And the first slide I'd show here is some of the relatively impressive targets, aspirations and plans where considerable progress has been made. But as I think is also part of the current discussions during this Hydrogen Week, there are also some significant challenges ahead and some increased efforts to dedicate oneself to. So it's a bit of a mix, and maybe a few years ago in hindsight, maybe very early stage optimism was a bit too high, maybe there was a bit of political hyperbole. Now maybe the risk is that pessimism becomes too significant and it becomes slightly gloomy and doomy, which I think would be a shame because there are important efforts and achievements being made. Still, there are some challenges, and I'll use the next roughly 10 minutes for setting the scene and pointing to some of those challenges and maybe also what to do and possibly what to do less of, as it were. So where to start to unpack sort of the real triggers for demand taking off? I come from the regulatory community currently, and so we like to start with networks and infrastructure. That's where we feel at home. And I'll start with this picture. Are you familiar where this picture comes from? Maybe it's a generational thing, maybe a bit older. It's an American movie, Field of Dreams. Build the baseball field, the analogy here is to networks, and it will come. Actually, much of the current discussions in regulatory circles on terms of hydrogen is to approach the needed build-out of the hydrogen network and as a function of expected demand. So there are issues around how much network as a function of expected demand and where. What are the tariff implications? What to pay now, what to pay later? And what about risk allocation? Who bears which types of costs if indeed that demand fails to materialize in a trajectory which warranted that network investment in the first place? Now, sometimes as regulators, we get the impression a bit that the pitch is, if you only build it, it will come. Demand will come and supply will come. Which, of course, begs the question, is that really true for hydrogen? And more specifically, what regulators often counter there is, we get it, it is part of the equation, but we need greater level of, let's say, demand visibility so as to warrant that particular infrastructure investment. So let's turn to that, network plans, as it were. Not surprisingly, network plans across Europe for hydrogen are at quite significantly different levels of maturity. Most advanced, probably Germany and Spain. There are issues which hinder, I think, other jurisdictions also picking up at a, let's say, an equally accelerated pace, namely the future demand uncertainty for hydrogen offtake, and also the somewhat complex interplay of hydrogen with electricity and gas sector developments, which I'll come back to. The same applies, this, let's say, different levels of maturity and approaches to production and demand outlooks all across Europe. So some definitely see themselves in a significant exporter type situation. Others find themselves likely in a significant import situation. Some are more oriented towards meeting domestic consumption expectations, and many still seem to be contemplating a bit where they sit here and what they should target, presumably because of some uncertainty as to future demand. Now, tallying these different plans up, again, significant progress is being made. There are indeed some challenges, and it's safe to say that we are relatively far off some of the 2030 targets or aspirational plans for 2030, speaking to the challenges that the sector currently faces and is tackling. Whether it's overall levels of hydrogen production or electrolyzer deployment, there are definitely a way to go before getting closer to meeting the target set. And this, of course, begs the million-euro question: what gives? Is it the supply? Is it the demand? Is it the network connecting the two? And that's a question I'll pose to you for a little of an interactive element, if you will, because sometimes this gets a bit blurred and a bit fuzzy. So what do you think, audience? Is it primarily supply? Is it primarily demand? Is it primarily network uptake, which is, let's say, the driver? What do you think? How many here are tempted to say all of the above? All right. Okay. You, Vasilis. Okay. Right. It's my colleague, actually, from ACER. Okay. Indeed. There's probably something there for all three elements of the triangle. But I hope you'll accept my take that it may be an analytical shortcut to say all of the above, and it may not render that much practical advice to decision makers where to really start and tackle some of the issues ahead. And I would venture, personally speaking, that most transitions start with demand and what drives demand. And so that brings with it a premium, for instance, on public support for demand switching investment, bringing down the capex cost for that, but also to invest in mechanisms which enhance the visibility on future demand, which in turn then drives supply-side decisions and network deployment type decisions. Now, demand uncertainty is not exclusive to hydrogen. Hydrogen is in good company here. It's also very prevalent in electricity. These quotes here revolve around what we call the European Resource Adequacy Assessment, which an assessment we sign off on. It's an assessment which seeks to identify adequacy risks for electricity, which is a precursor for entertaining capacity mechanisms to alleviate those adequacy risks. Why do I mention it here? This, let's say, quite divergent expectations of electricity demand, presumably driven by the outcome that will lead to. I mention because it's interesting to observe what this demand uncertainty sometimes lead to in conversations. Let's take one example: curtailment of electricity. Sometimes we as regulators, we come up across let's say the advocacy pitch to stimulate demand to save otherwise wasted electrons, otherwise curtailed electrons. To which you might say, wait a second, maybe the problem there is the deployment frameworks in the first place. Maybe we had deployment frameworks in place which put too much stuff in the wrong places far from demand centers. Maybe we failed to give the asset operators sufficient risk so they would have their deployment decisions and their operational decisions influenced by system needs. Or take that one step further, something I heard a few weeks ago when I was back in Brussels at another conference, not that far from here. Electricity grid investments ahead will be very significant, and the cost on tariff payers will be big. I think that's a given. It's a widely shared view. And then comes to regulators sometimes the proposition, let's stimulate demand then, so we have more network users to pay for it. Wait a second. So we're stimulating demand, not now to recalibrate versus supply, but to pay for the grids which connects the two. What I want to say here is, I'm tempted to coin this a little bit, as sort of cart before the horse dynamics or cart before the horse rationale. This is what I hear sometimes over in the electricity world. And I would just politely advise against the hydrogen community to draw inspiration from this in terms of looking at something suboptimal or expensive and come in with a fix which becomes part of the longer-term business case, because I don't think it'll be viable. Let's explore then how we get more to this demand visibility and how we address some of the drivers of that demand. And obviously, there's no beating about the bush. There is an issue of relative cost, which I think is part of the discussions here. There are certainly issues around the current cost of renewable hydrogen, vis-a-vis more fossil-based, but there is also silver linings there in terms of the outcomes of this so-called hydrogen bank auction not that long ago, which showed an optimistic trajectory in terms of bringing down that, let's say, price-cost disparity. On top of cost, there comes also the additional issue of planning complexity. It's safe to say that in certain parts of Europe, our electricity grids currently are facing significant strain, meaning that hydrogen deployment can either exacerbate or potentially alleviate certain congestion patterns. And for sure, given the state of affairs of electricity grids in parts of Europe, that, let's say, challenge of electricity grid build-out may also risk hijacking, as it were, hydrogen deployment plans as such. In addition, there are significant locational choices to be made, which linger around electrolyzer deployment. Which gets closest to demand? Is it the electrons or is it the molecules? Which, of course, speaks to more integrated planning. And again, that more integrated planning will benefit very significantly from greater visibility of demand, as that will inform the planning that needs to be done. This, we recognize, is much easier said than done. It is a difficult enterprise for sure. I'll give you one example from the jurisdiction that I come from, namely Denmark. So there is a significant offshore endowment in Denmark, which arguably warrants a significant build-out of offshore wind way above the national consumption of that wind. Now, who would want to bid for those tenders of offshore wind? They probably need to have quite significant certainty about offtake of electrons, maybe offtake of molecules. So that speaks to having, in certain areas of the country, power to X hubs in place, which speaks to the need to have interconnected pipelines in place. But of course, here comes the kicker. A country such as Denmark, primary use cases for hydrogen is maybe maritime transport or aviation, not heavy industry, as you would see a significant off-taker down south. So it adds to the complexity of the planning picture. The scale and the implications are much more beneficial and positive. The higher we get, the bigger we get, but it also adds to some of the planning complexity and some of the synchronicity one needs to have in place. If one bids for a 2 or 3 gigawatt offshore tender, and one has in mind a business case, a mix of electrons and molecules, one needs to be relatively certain about the offtake in order to be, let's say, confident about one's bid in competition with others. So costs and planning complexity impacts visibility of demand. So what near-term implications to draw from this? Again, coming back to a regulatory perspective, I would come with this. Complexity, some uncertainty, means it's probably a good bet to keep advancing, but advancing with prudence. I find it hard-pressed to find someone in the audience who would strongly disagree with this, I think. So maybe we can unpack it just a bit further as it comes to networks. There is something around network planning where the more demand forecasting we can improve, the better we will be in terms of visibility of demand. And the more we can proceed incrementally with network build-out under these perspectives of uncertainty, the better off we'll be. Incremental doesn't mean slow, it just means prudent. And secondly, in terms of financing and risks allocation, demand risks need to be well considered, and one needs to allocate well placement of risk. That has a time component. What do current network users pay? And what do future network users pay, where cost recovery options presumably will be higher? But it also has implications on who bears which share of risks if demand fails to materialize. So coming back to what I said in the beginning, we have a lot of insights, also some tentative recommendations in this very first market monitoring report that we have done on hydrogen out today. We group these in roughly 4 different categories. One is on infrastructure and infrastructure planning and forecasting. One is on this issue of financing and risk mitigation. A third is around getting the policy and regulatory framework in place, ideally sooner rather than later. And the fourth evolves around the electricity sector, hopefully continuing this rapid decarbonization of electricity, which in turn will have positive knock-on effects on low-carbon hydrogen supply. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to the panel.
Christian, thank you so much for your insightful setting the scene. So what I'm taking away from your words is really about visibility of demand, integrated planning, and really also making sure the risk allocation on the demand side is fairly tuned. So now let's move on to the panel debate. And I've got now the honor to ask the different panelists to join me one by one on stage. I would actually start with Mechthild. Mechthild Wörsdörfer, Deputy Director General, European Commission. She's been in charge since October 2021 and in the coordination of the just and green energy transition. She's got vast experience and has been also steering the bilateral relations with Ukraine, Moldavia, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. And it's great to have you here with us, Mechthild. Please come and join us here on the stage.
Thank you.
Huh? Next to Mechthild, we've got Martin. Martin Wetzeler, CEO from Moeve, or Move, how do I best pronounce it, Martin? Moeve, okay, Moeve even. Martin also comes with a vast business background experience. Many of you might know him already on his previous roles from Royal Dutch Shell, where he's been actually working for 26 years and served on the firm's executive committee as Director of Integrated Gas, Renewables and Energy Solutions. He's been also working very internationally, and I think it's great to have you here with Moeve and actually listen to your words today, Martin. Thank you very much. Please give him a warm welcome. Next to join me here on stage is Holger. Holger Kretz is the Chief Operating Officer of Uniper. He's in charge since March 2023. He's been working beforehand many years with Uniper and with E.ON, has been holding also positions in Turkey, also again vast international experience, which I think very much adds to the international and European outlook we are having today. It's great to have you with us today, Holger. Please join us here. And now Stefano Innocenzi, working with Linde as President of Region Europe West. Stefano has been working with Linde for many years. He joined in 2001. He's also had some interim experience with Siemens Energy, so also has seen actually the supplier manufacturer side. It's great to have you here on board. Stefano, please join us here. All right, it's great to have such a panel here. I'm feeling a little bit intimidated being the moderator and knowing there's so much expertise. But let's see how we take it and go with the flow here. So let me start with you, Mechthild. Basically, to which extent do the national energy and climate plans reflect progress on meeting the Fit for 55 package objectives? So what specific metrics do you as DG Energy really envisage? And again, we talk about implementation, so how do we actually track it?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us, and congratulations to ACER also for the presentation and the report. I think it gives a lot of very, very good insights to the development of this nascent hydrogen market. And I would agree to most of it. I would have a few comments, but...
what are the differences? What would you not agree with?
I think when we compare where we need to go by 2030, indeed, we had in Repower some aspirational targets of 10 million ton domestic and 10 million ton of green hydrogen external. I think through the crisis and the Fit for 55 legislation, I think we should really look at the renewables targets and the sub-targets for green hydrogen. 42% for industry and the 29% for transport. These are the measurements when we need to look, and that would be our advice. I don't say it's wrong, it just has evolved that this sub-targets under our renewables would hopefully create the demand which is needed and all the assessment which has been done. So I think here we could evolve around that. And that brings me to your question, because it's all about implementation. I mean, really, we have the new renewables directive with the targets of 42.5% renewables by 2030, aspirational 45%. They are the sub-targets for green hydrogen, industry and transport. And this the member states have to implement by May next year. We are helping them, but I think that would become one of the big triggers also for the development of hydrogen in these two key sectors where we see hydrogen energy intensives, transport, long-distance transport. And that is obviously linked to the national energy and climate plans, which the member states have to do in order to tell us how they see their trajectory for renewables and energy efficiency until 2030. The bad news is that out of the 27 EU countries, we only got 14 final national and energy climate plans. We are expecting still 13 more, and we are pushing all occasions to push the member states to update, because then only we can do the assessment. With half of them, it's very hard to do the assessment on where we are on our way to accelerate renewables, to accelerate energy efficiency, to accelerate all clean energy technologies. So 2 messages here: implementation of the legal framework to give predictability, to trigger, the targets are there to really trigger and give predictability and trigger investments. We all know we need huge investments, and I think industry is better placed here to tell more about it. And these national energy and climate plans, we have some good ones where they have hydrogen targets, national hydrogen targets and strategy, but we need all of them to really do a proper assessment.
So you're really saying the burden or the ball is in the game of the member states now. And that actually also brings me to one panelist whom I would really very much welcome to join me now on stage. That's Mohammed Abdelkalal Ekrami, Chief Green Officer, Hydrogen from Mazda. And I think it's a perfect timing for you to join us on stage, because member states implementing targets and hence incentivizing concrete demand. And with Mazda, a very strong company looking also to producing and exporting into the European Union, I think that is a very important bridge. So maybe, Mohammed, if I can just ask you right away, how critical hence is the offtake and the vision Europe has, as Mechthild also depicted, for you as a company?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be in this forum today in beautiful Brussels and this beautiful rainy weather. Of course, Europe sits at the center stage of the new evolution, let's call it, of the fuel of the future. We understate how important hydrogen is for us in the next coming decades. People talk about climate change. I just flew from Paco, where we have attended COP29, preceding the COP that was in Dubai, COP28. And there is definitely commitments coming from all around the world towards net zero and decarbonization, especially in Europe. This is purely driven by regulation frameworks. Very little people know that when we talk about decarbonation or net zero, this in industrialized cities such as, for example, Germany or even Belgium, this can only meet up to 30 to 50% of decarbonization. Even if we electrify all the entire production of electricity from renewables, the remaining 50 to 70% depends on hydrogen. So hydrogen will inevitably play a very important role in that. In Europe, it is expected half of the global demand to be in Europe, and almost 30 to 40% of that half in Germany alone. So this is why Europe sits at the center stage for us as Masdar. The vast majority of the projects we are pursuing currently focuses on Europe, and focuses on Europe from the two sides, the demand and the supply. Of course, I agree with the gentleman here on stage that it's an integrated approach, but maybe demand sets a higher priority because demand will create, accelerate, and incentivize supply from scalability to bankability and making it more cost effective. This is why we focus on Northern Europe when it comes to demand, particularly the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany. And we focus on Southern Europe when it comes to supply, particularly Spain and Portugal, because we believe they have abundance of allocated land, the right infrastructure, and most importantly, the right elements for a cost-effective green electron, either DNI, GHI, for CSP, PV, or even onshore wind, making the cost, the predicted cost of hydrogen more cost-effective. So in a nutshell, Masdar looks at Europe with great importance. 50% of our business plan focuses on Europe, and our focus on Europe could be either by exporting the green molecule directly from Abu Dhabi to Europe. The only restriction here is the transportation vector. If it's ammonia, well and good, but if it's hydrogen, then transforming, converting, and reconverting by cracking would be a business killer, as simple as that, because the cost will be astronomical. This is why we even target export to Europe, not only from UAE, but also from North Africa, particularly Morocco, Egypt, and Southern Europe, particularly Spain and Portugal.
Thank you very much. So definitely a strong case, and also the importance of European demand. You mentioned actually Spain is one of those markets in Europe where we've got quite some favorable conditions. Martin, I mean, with Moev, you are very active in that region, and we're looking at refineries, but you also look at fertilizer as potential, let me call it demand tractors. So how do you now see the role, specifically maybe of the refineries, and does the current regulatory framework really sufficiently incentivized to achieve the vision Mechthild so nicely laid out?
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for the opportunity to be with you today. And I'll come to the refinery question in a moment. But I want to first support what Mechthild said about the sub-targets for transport and industry are really the things that count. Let's not get too obsessed by a single number. And also support what Mohammed said in terms of the European setup is actually quite simple. We have demand in the middle and competitive supply in the north and the south. In Scandinavia, particularly because of incremental hydro, I don't believe so much in offshore wind because it's quite expensive source of renewable power, and the south of Europe, as Mohammed just explained well. And if I then come to the regulatory framework and I broaden it a little bit, I want to take you back to when the Ukraine conflict started. And the sense of urgency we all felt about creating energy independence in Europe, added to the sense of urgency we all felt about climate change and the need to decarbonize more quickly, and the ensuing ambitious targets for green hydrogen adoption, etc. When that all happened in 2022, I thought that by now we would be halfway building the hydrogen pipeline that connects these two obvious supply centers, Scandinavia and Iberia, to the demand centers in the middle. And so what I worry about is not so much the regulatory setup, it's this totally lacking sense of urgency. We now talk about prudence. Let's be prudent. No, let's be almost in panic mode. We have to decarbonize and create energy independence, and we can, but the problem is we're overthinking. It's a typical European thing. We analyze this thing to death and try to see how much demand might there be in 2038 in this German village. Whilst we know we need a hydrogen pipeline to connect the south and the extremes of Europe to the center anyway by 2040, there is not a single energy model that says we don't need that pipeline. So why are we not building it yet? Why haven't we adopted more the American way of doing things? Is let's do stuff, see what works and do more of it, and see what doesn't work and stop doing it, rather than trying to make a theory of how the world will work before we start implementing. And after that sense of urgency that the small moment in which we thought, now we're going to break through, we're down to making big spreadsheets that try to project the demand in every village in Europe in 2041. That way, we're not going to reach the targets, and we're certainly not going to be either energy dependent or get our climate targets in place. So to me, the big question is how can we rediscover the urgency and then make the regulatory framework such or adopt it in a way that it allows the urgency to be translated into real projects, such as making green hydrogen refineries. Because I do think that is the logical first step, is to make the green hydrogen close to where the current demand is, so you don't yet need the pipeline. You can actually supply hydrogen to current customers in industry, emerging customers in heavy transport, such as in shipping and in road, etc., and move away from these centers to start to supply envelopes. But without the visibility of infrastructure that connects these two obvious supply centers to demand, I think we don't stand a chance.
That was very clear, Martin. Thank you very much. So definitely a sense of urgency, moving rather to action than overanalyze things. Holger, I mean, as Uniper, you've also set out quite some ambitious plans and have a strategy to deliver on hydrogen. I mean, what are your thoughts? Are we lacking in terms of sense of urgency, or what is holding us back in order to give you the horizon to really move ahead?
Yeah, thank you. Before to go this, maybe I start with something a bit positive, actually, because when we were here 2-3 years ago in these kind of panels, you know, there was really a hydrogen hype, and now it feels a little bit like a hydrogen depression. And I don't feel that we should be too depressed about what has been achieved over the last couple of years. When you look at, for example, the successful first auction of the European Hydrogen Bank, when you look at, for example, the investments that are taken on large electrolysis projects like you guys in RWE have done, Shell has done, we in Uniper have done, VNG, lots of players have really made the initial investments. When you look at the commitment of the German government to build 9,500 kilometers of transmission grid and to unlock the chicken-egg kind of problem for the German connecting situation, so all of these things are very positive. Now, having said that, I feel very similar to yourself in terms of the need to now urgently continue our path and not get too depressed by some of the challenges that lie ahead of us. And you were asking for, you know, what are these kind of challenges? Number one, let's start with connecting supply and demand. You were elaborating to the pipeline. Not only the pipeline, also what is lacking from my perspective is a clear commitment and explanation of the regulatory framework and potentially subsidy scheme. How exactly will import work in Europe? We are everybody knows very much that the demand of the centerpiece of Europe will only be fulfilled if we get the molecules from places where we have super cheap electricity, which is unfortunately not particularly in the center of Europe. But we will need to go to Southern Europe, we will need to go to Northern Europe, we will go Northern Africa, Middle East, India, these kind of places. So definitely we need to import the molecules. And as we know, as you know, I'm COO, so I'm responsible for the assets and the engineering stuff, and I know how long it takes to get an import terminal developed through the permitting process and constructed. So we better start yesterday, to be honest, to get that one started together with the pipelines to really have then the opportunities in the centerpiece of Europe to import. So that's a very important centerpiece. The second piece, obviously, that's not only import, but also we need to unlock some of the difficulties that we've created ourselves in Europe and some of the member states by too complex and too difficult regulation. I'm always giving the example, and thanks for putting the Danish example here, because it's a very good one. If you look at, we have projects in Sweden, in Germany, in Denmark, in the UK, And if we look at our German project and the Danish project, in Denmark, we can run an electrolyzer for 8,000 hours. In Germany, we can only run it for 5,000 hours because of EU regulation that is currently in place with additionality and the kind of timing needs to have the electrons when they're ready. So that is an obstacle I think we have given ourselves. We were all happy a couple of years ago with RED 2, RED 3 and the Delegated Act, but now we realize it's very difficult to get the projects off the ground, and that needs to be changed. And here I'm just supporting the letter our economy minister has sent to the European Commission that we can't wait until 28 to change that.
Okay, so I've heard again a topic about infrastructure, another plea for just get it done. On the other hand, I mean, Mohammed, you made it also very clear. If we see the transport chains, it's also adding costs. So it's also a question what type of product, be it a gaseous form or actually the derivative, is being needed. Stefano, Linde is a company globally active. And actually, I was briefed kind of that you are very active in Canada and maybe less so yet in Europe. Why is that the case? And any views in supporting or maybe contradicting statements from you on what we've heard so far?
Okay, you give me the job of giving a complete statement. Okay, I will try my best. So, as a company, we supply hydrogen to customers everywhere in the world, right? The industrial gas companies. So we work on projects in Europe, we work on projects everywhere with our electrolyzer. We have been running 80 electrolyzers in the world in the past, right? Smaller one, supply customers. So we are very neutral to technology. Now, I would start with why Canada, but not only Canada and North America. You have seen we have done an investment of around 2 billion to decarbonize the cracker of Dow in Canada. And it was not driven by a requirement I have to do it. It was driven by subsidies. So in Canada, you get subsidies up to 50% if you're producing hydrogen with a certain level of CO2, and it doesn't matter what technology you're using, so very technology neutral. You got subsidy tax schemes for CCS investment. On top, the Alberta state has a carbon mechanism, like similar to ETS, where we also got money for sequestrating and selling the CO2 molecules. And there is another mechanism that favor our future customers, some of the refineries, which are also taking hydrogen in their production. So the Alberta project was an economical decision to go ahead. The same we did with OCI, right? We invest almost $1.5 billion in Texas to do also blue hydrogen project. So these two projects were driven by economical consideration. The challenge for us in doing projects in Europe, and we are really trying, and we have some coming up, and we are also looking at blue hydrogen project in Europe together with green hydrogen, if we want to still speak about the colors. The challenge is Europe is we have a mandatory requirement by 2030. But the cost of the molecule and the support scheme make them not economical. So what will people do? We'll wait until the last minute. And this is the reason why not many contracts signed for the offtake of molecules. So in our opinion, we should look at remove the colors, right? The RFNBO is quite a strict definition. We should first relax the RFNBO recognition, as well as looking at what it called blue hydrogen or low carbon hydrogen to support. And then we will have two molecules that support the industry. On the long term, when renewable growth, you will see green picking up more and more, but we need something for the transition. The reality shows us not many offtake agreements are signed. While in Canada, we invested $2 billion on a large cracker for decarbonization. So very simple comparison. Did I give you the other perspective?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Stefano. So points around being a bit more, let me call it carbon, color open in terms of transitionary technologies, etc. I mean, you mentioned a little bit, we've got this great 2030 RED 3 targets, and everyone is basically just waiting on the fence, sitting before they want to sign any contract, because the later you move, maybe the better in a position you are. So, and Mechthild, you also very clearly said the member states have to move, but let's be now very open and honest about it. What is holding the member states back? We have a European target. We have off-takers who would like to, but find it difficult to move. We've got a lot of project developers who are also keen to advance their projects. So what would we need to see change with member states, Mechthild, to really then get going?
So first of all, I would agree that it would be good to come back with a sense of urgency. I mean, those who have been through this energy crisis and unprecedented in the last 2 years, a lot of member states, but I would also claim with the European Commission and the solidarity among the 27, we moved fast. The dependence on Russian gas has decreased enormously from 45 to 18%. Solar and wind have picked up. We have 2 record years in renewables in Europe, and we have seen some first developments on the hydrogen side with the hydrogen bank. It's not huge, but there are some FDIs also happening. I think in the press what we read is more the negative views, but there are something happening. Maybe there was a bit of a hype, I would agree, but I think a bit of realism, pragmatism right now is also happening. So member states, we are working with member states. As I said, we help them to implement what is needed. And I would also share that there is a bit of an issue, demand, supply, grids, and the framework, and funding. And the difference maybe between the US and Canada, because we hear that very often, our funding is limited, let's be honest. The EU funding and the Hydrogen Bank, where we are very proud, and we are now preparing the second call, it's a drop in the ocean. We need national money, we need more engagement here compared to what others are doing, and I think that we are working together with the member states, we are working with our state aid regulations, though there is a lot to do also for this new commission, which will hopefully start very soon. So this sense of urgency out of the crisis should be running, and I hope we can do it together with the member states and the industry, and help them to implement. When it comes to funding, as I said, there is not that much at EU level, but here also some good news, because the second call of the Hydrogen Bank will be on the 3rd of December. But yesterday, 3 member states, Spain, Austria and Lithuania, say they will do their part in auction of first service and put their own national money onto that. So in addition to this 1.2 billion, we will reach nearly 2 billion in that next call, and Germany had done it already previously. So we are seeing signs from the member state to step up on funding, to also implement some, I was maybe a bit negative in the beginning, but some member states, be it on our hydrogen legislation, but also on grids, have moved up. Germany is the first one who have facilitated permitting, others will follow. So I think this continuous effort with our member states to help them with industry and keep that sense of urgency, which obviously out of the urgent crisis is unfortunately a bit down. But the new Commission will focus also on Clean Industrial Deal, that's very much known, on affordable energy, but also continue decreasing the dependence of Russian gas. It's a top priority as well, how to do that with more renewables, with more energy efficiency, with all kinds of hydrogen. And here I might close also, we from the Commission, together with the member states, I think we are learning, we are adapting, the market has changed, and we are probably more technology neutral and more color friendly than we used with the start of this mandate. This is a realism I think we can agree to. We are adapting it, but I think we need to reflect on how to implement, and I would argue against changing anything right now. We will discuss. We are also open for suggestion, but we have a delegated act on renewable hydrogen, just agreed after intense discussion, and we are about, probably also for the new Commission, to come out with a delegated act on defining the low-carbon hydrogen. This is in the making. We have a lot of exchanges with experts from member states. We have different views from member states. Like often, I would say, we will find the right balance and will continue working on that. Thank you.
I'm definitely very much looking forward to seeing a low-carbon delegated act, which is really taking the learnings from the very difficult first RFNBO delegated act. And I would even see this as an opportunity. If things have taken a long time to agree, I think it's also an indicator that there might be some room for improvement. But Martin, you actually raised your hand when Spain was mentioned one more time. It seems to be the market of the day.
And well, and it should be, because it has the ideal circumstance to be the leader in Europe in producing green hydrogen, because it has the sun, the onshore wind, and the space to build up the European industry that Europe needs to beat its targets, or at least meet them. I'd like to follow up quickly on two things. I do think funding is clearly an issue, and we need to push as hard as possible. We often get the question, wouldn't you much rather be in the US, because there you have the IRA, assuming that the new president keeps it in place. But we've always consistently said as a company that we actually rather be in Europe, because although the funding mechanisms are not as straightforward and not as rich as the IRA, what Europe does really well, is the creation of demand, is actually stimulating demand. And I think that is actually a more important thing than putting subsidy on supply. Because you cannot subsidize supply forever. You have to incentivize demand. If I look at the way the sustainable aviation fuel industry is growing, the only reason it grows is that there's a demand mandate, a European demand mandate. If we have the same for RFNBO, we have the same for hydrogen in industry, in transport, etc. So actually, my only request to Mechthild and to Europe on that will be, don't blink. Because people will invest money against those mandates. People see a mandated European green hydrogen market by 2030 that will exist as long as we don't blink. And we can invest against that. But if in 2028 we change the targets or we make them looser, then you lose a lot of investor confidence. So to me, the regulation that we have in place about demand is the reason a lot of money will be invested in Europe in the coming years to make supply meet that demand. As long as we get back to urgently creating infrastructure, as per my first point.
Okay, so
I'm very supportive
again
of the setup that we have.
But Martin, you said don't blink. On the other hand, one could also say, why are we not even more, let me call it, courageous? Yeah, I mean, we've got 1% in the transport sector in terms of RFNBO usage. So, I mean, isn't that actually an opportunity to even further increase? I mean, any other views here? Holger, Stefano?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the topics that we are a little bit talking around is what causes the situation that we are going from hype to depression in such a short time. And obviously the big topic from my perspective is with the Russian invasion into Ukraine, two things have fundamentally changed. One is the necessity to invest in defense and security, and second, the cheap energy fueling Europe. And so with both, there is a debate happening in all member states and in Europe how much priority can be given and needs to be given to climate change beyond the necessary defense investments and so on. And I feel similar to Martin that the climate change issue is not going away because of a war in Europe. So therefore, we need to make consistently investments in this transition. And the transition, this also needs to be fairly explained to everybody, will cost some money. We will need to fuel for a certain period of time a gas and a hydrogen pipeline. We will need to fuel importing green and grey molecules. We will need to build a lot of pipelines, a lot of electricity grids in Europe and so on. That will all cost a lot of money. And the question who's going to pay for that one is debated on different levels and not always concluded. And that for me is really the big topic that needs to get sorted for all of these other things to unlock when it comes to funding.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, we are talking a lot about how the adaptation or ramp-up of the hydrogen market is going to cost. We hardly talk about all the subsidies which are currently also in the play for fossil fuels, which are still happening today. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a shadow discussion, but I think it could actually unleash, again, more sense of urgency to saying, let's put it into perspective, how much is really cost what. Stefano, I know you've been kind of shaking a little bit on your seat, willing to contribute.
So I agree on most of the things, right? One of the perspective we need to look at is the users of the molecules. I give you steel, right? Steel is one of our larger customers with oxygen, etc. You go to a steel company and you say, I give you subsidy for DRI. The guy built a DRI. There are no natural gas reducing half of the CO2 emission. Then we go and say, oh, the next step you have to take RFNBO hydrogen, right? Because a lot of the guys get forced to, and then their production costs go up by 50, 60%. And this is the challenge, right? The reason why I was pushing also for the no color of hydrogen and this large investment in low carbon hydrogen as well to help the transition is because fundamentally we need to look at not making the industry fall apart, right? I mean, we need a steel production, in my opinion. At least my opinion, we still need steel production in Europe, and we need to be careful that we provide the schemes, etc., that make economical to produce steel, because if you make the economics of a green hydrogen in a steel mill DRI, you will see that costs will go up by 30, 40, 50%. And then it makes their production economical. And this is the area where we really need to, I agree, we need to push it further, otherwise I would not be here, but we need to look at the economics of our industry and look at what are the solutions that make that economical.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we are all sitting here because we've got a strong interest in actually making sure that the future of the European industry is actually competitive, because without that competitiveness, we won't have long-term demand, and it doesn't matter whether we are developing projects in the Middle East or in Europe, it's going to actually hit a point. Mohammed, I mean, topic about European competitiveness, I mean, what is coming to your mind if you hear this, and how does it actually relate to, let me call it, maybe the cost regression curve that your company is also heavily pushing?
Well, I think in Europe, I look at it from two perspectives. Mitigation of risk and creation of value. When we look at Europe, the two major risks we have is, number one, energy security, which has direct relationship with national security. So you need to diversify your energy portfolio. So that's a risk you need to mitigate. And let's not also forget that there are environmental risks that if we look at it from a different perspective, it would make sense to mitigate that risks by spending a portion on what we pay to firefight it. I read an article the other day that in European states spend as much as 200 billion euros per year, flooding and all the natural disasters. This is climate change, by the way. I mean, if we allocate 10% of that money in a form of a support mechanism, that's mitigation of risk. Look at it from this perspective. While creating value, value would be created only and only if we look at hydrogen from a macroeconomic scale, not at 3,000 feet, at 40,000 feet. Because Europe, since World War II, depended on what we call the knowledge-based economy. This is knowledge-based economy. Now, unfortunately, it hurts me as a Mediterranean who's always been near and dear to European technology, reliability, robustness, see that all technologies have migrated outside, either going to USA because of the IRA or going to China. So now, for me, as a developer, and I'm a technology agnostic, at the end of the day, I look at the cost. I'm driving away from European manufacturing because it's still not as advanced and not as cost competitive. So I think Europe needs to look at it more seriously. When we speak about the backbone, we call it the backbone, the back to Martin point. So the pipeline is of paramount importance, and I don't understand why till today there are certain governments. I've been with my boss, Dr. Sultan Jaber, and G2G, and I've heard certain countries would invest up to 15 billion euros on cracking technology. Why would I do that? Spend half of that on a pipeline and diversify that transportation vector on piloting not only cracking, let's pilot liquid H2 and let's pilot liquid organic hydrogen carriers. Also diversify that exposure when it comes to the export of the molecule from other countries to Europe. So I think Europe needs to look at these two perspectives very carefully, knowing that the creation of the hydrogen economy will bring value over and beyond. GDP, direct foreign investments, technologies. The World Bank estimated on the most conservative scenario that the investments in green hydrogen, because the final objective is green hydrogen, not because my title, is going to reach up to $11 trillion by the year 2050. That's the most conservative, 20 plus on the optimistic scenario. So there are certain risks that we need to mitigate and act upon, and there are great opportunities and values we can create within European states that we need to capture.
I think that is a very, let me call it, a cheerful perspective, Mohammed. Thank you for that, because there's a lot we as Europe can learn in terms of embracing the opportunity, being very clear about what are the real risks behind it if we don't act and are not now actually having the sense of urgency in implementing those relative targets. And I'm also looking to many of the developers here sitting on the panel to actually help us deliver on this. Thank you so much for your discussion today, and thank you for the audience for listening to us. The session, I see some people already moving out. We are not done yet because we still have a very esteemed speaker to join us, because we talked a lot about Europe, and we do have also an island sitting in Europe with a very important, let me call it, region, Scotland, where we now have Dr. Alistair Allen, Member of the Scottish Parliament and Acting Minister for Climate Action of the Scottish Government, with us, who can share now his views in his keynote closing the session. Thank you so much. Please join us here.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, and thank you for your patience. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and to witness firsthand your valuable insight on how industry can support the implementation of the ambitious Fit for 55 targets and what barriers there might be along the way. This is the third year that a Scottish Government Minister has been invited to speak at European Hydrogen Week, and that reflects, I hope, Scotland's own hydrogen ambitions as a country and how these are recognised internationally, and that we Scots wish to remain close to our European partners. We do not want Scotland's position, as has been mentioned, outside the European Union, not a situation which our country chose, I should say. We do not wish our country's position outside the European Union to act as a barrier to Scotland realising our full potential as part of the clear locus of hydrogen production and infrastructure emerging around the North Sea. Scotland's ambitious climate change legislation sets a target date for national net zero emissions of all greenhouse gases by 2045. We are now halfway in Scotland to net zero, and we continue to be ahead of the UK as a whole in delivering long-term emissions reductions. So our commitment to ending our contribution to global emissions by 2045 at the latest remains unwavering. Scotland is able to set such ambitious targets as we are a nation blessed with renewable resources. In 2022, the equivalent of 113% of Scotland's gross electricity consumption was generated from renewable sources, an increase of 26% compared to 2021. As of December 2023, installed renewable electricity capacity had increased to 15.3 gigawatts, with most of Scotland's operational capacity currently coming from offshore wind. Scotland continues to generate more electricity than it needs, with net exports of electricity to other UK nations. Subject to planning and consenting decisions and finding a route to market, we have a reported potential pipeline of over 40 gigawatts of offshore wind projects on top of 3 gigawatts which is currently operational. In addition, we have the ambition for up to 12 gigawatts further onshore by 2030, and the potential for growth in marine and solar capacity. In the Orkney Islands, for example, we have the world's first hydrogen generated from tidal energy. This wealth of renewable electricity will be the primary route to decarbonisation for many parts of our energy system and is key to supporting electrolytic production of hydrogen at scale. In Scotland, we are clear that hydrogen is a key part of our net zero journey. Our Hydrogen Action Plan, published in 2022, sets out the strategic approach and actions required to support the development of the hydrogen economy in Scotland by 2026. Our ambition as a country is to have 5 gigawatts of hydrogen production capacity by 2030 and 25 gigawatts by 2045. We already have a very active hydrogen sector in Scotland. There are over 100 green hydrogen production projects in various stages of development in Scotland, which, if realised, suggest our production ambition of 5 gigawatts by 2030 will be exceeded. There are also blue hydrogen projects being planned that represent a potential hydrogen production capacity of more than 1.8 gigawatts. And some of these, of course, are linked to the Scottish CCUS cluster progressing. So Scotland's rich renewables inheritance means that in addition to generating enough green electricity to power Scotland's economy, we can also export hydrogen to our neighbours, supporting jobs in Scotland and the decarbonisation ambitions of our partners. And that is why we are working closely with the UK government, which holds many of the levers needed to support the emergence of Scotland's hydrogen economy, to ensure that our collective vision is aligned and benefits are realised across all the nations of the UK. It is important that we fully understand and address barriers to hydrogen deployment, as has been mentioned today, and that we are taking action on this front. In response to the rapidly growing pipeline of hydrogen projects in Scotland, currently we have a strong pipeline of hydrogen projects that have been granted planning permission, and many more will be coming forward for planning consent in the next 2 years. The Scottish Government is supporting planning authorities that may be experiencing challenges in terms of resourcing, skills and capacity that impact on the timescales around determinations. Earlier this summer, funding was made available to provide direct support for the handling of hydrogen planning applications by planning authorities. Now, all of this will establish infrastructure in Scotland for a national planning hub, which can subsequently offer a wider range of services. In addition to this, we commissioned collaborative academic expertise from Edinburgh University, the University of Strathclyde and Aberdeen University to design and deliver a course entitled An Introduction to Hydrogen for the Public Sector. This public awareness is very important. Everyone in this room today understands hydrogen's role in our net zero journey and is working hard to realise the opportunities this presents. However, to make the most of these opportunities offered by hydrogen, we must bring others with us by increasing awareness of its many applications and ensuring that our production capacity and demand are supported in tandem. However, as I've mentioned, the hydrogen opportunity for Scotland and for the UK surpasses our borders. The potential international trade opportunity from hydrogen is considerable. Market signal demands for the importing of green hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives is growing strongly, with Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium and the EU leading the way. This opens new economic and supply chain and skills transition opportunities, as well as the development of clean and enduring industrial scale activity. To maximise these opportunities, we are working shortly to publish our hydrogen sector export plan. And this plan will identify the necessary steps for Scotland to realise the opportunities to become a net exporter of hydrogen and hydrogen products, whilst also harnessing the export opportunities across hydrogen supply chains. When we published our Green Industrial Strategy in Scotland in September, our aim was to assist Scotland to realise the economic growth opportunities from the global transition to net zero. The strategy recognised that Scotland is competing with other nations to secure investment and to grow competitive industries focused on renewable energy technologies and net zero. It identified hydrogen as one of the 5 opportunity areas where evidence shows Scotland has the potential to compete in global markets. And our export plan for Scotland's emerging hydrogen sector will now set out how we will take advantage of these opportunities for international growth. Through its publication, we aim to continue developing over the coming years bilateral and multilateral relations with our European neighbours to assist the growth of the sector at home and internationally. And in conclusion, we recognise the opportunity the development of the hydrogen sector represents to Scotland, to the wider UK and to Europe. As a nation in Scotland with a proud industrial and innovative heritage, we have the opportunity to help lead this transition while preserving and creating high-quality jobs. The development of the Scottish hydrogen economy can provide economic and social benefits while assisting us in meeting our net zero and just transition ambitions. We have worked hard to engage proactively with industry in developing our plans, and we will continue to do so in their delivery. Scotland has the potential to be a leading producer of renewable hydrogen and an exporter of that to Europe. And we look forward to working with you as we all make this journey. As a trusted and reliable trading partner, Scotland can play a central role in securing Europe's future energy supply, accelerating the global transition to net zero, and thereby help address the important issues that we have been discussing this morning. So thank you for your time today, and please enjoy the rest of your European Hydrogen Week. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you again to Dr. Alistair Allen, and wishing you all now a great break, and hopefully also very good, inspiring and joyful rest of the day here at the Hydrogen Europe Week. Thank you.